So Mark and I are talking about repackaging for offline use, repackaging Wikipedia and other material. Since it's a lightning talk, I'm going to start with my canonical lightning talk. Lightning is a sudden electrostatic discharge during a thunderstorm. This can occur between electrically charged regions of clouds, between two clouds, or between a cloud and the ground. Well, normally I like just reading the lightning article, but today it feels a little inappropriate. Nazism, National Socialism, is the ideology and practices associated with the German Nazi Party and other far-right groups. It's a form of fascism that incorporates scientific racism and anti-Semitism. It was influenced by German nationalism and by anti-communist paramilitary groups that emerged after the First World War. They aimed to overcome social divisions and create a pure, homogeneous society representing a people's community. Nazis chose to show their strength by exterminating Jews, the Roma, Slavs, and the handicapped. The National Socialist Party was a rebranding of the Workers' Party to broaden its appeal. In 1919, Adolf Hitler was invited to join the party because of his skills as an orator. Crowds flocked to his speeches, and he became the party's chief of propaganda and then its sole leader. In 1933, with the support of traditional conservatives, Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany. Nazis soon established a one-party state, and after the death of Hindenburg, political power was concentrated in his hands, and he became Germany's head of state with the title of the leader. Following the Holocaust and Germany's defeat in World War II, only a few fringe racist groups, and usually referred to as neo-Nazis, still describe themselves as followers of National Socialism. Of course, that's the current edition of the Wikipedia article. We're probably going to have to update it slightly since neo-Nazism is making a serious resurgence. As some of you may know, our current president is a neo-Nazi sympathizer, has been relatively supportive of some of their statements recently, famously spent a number of years reading his speeches, kept a copy of My New Order on his bedside. These are things that we can't necessarily address with education because people will be drawn to whatever historical influences and whatever channels of learning they find attractive. But what we can do is make sure that people who don't have a lot of time to learn have a balance of other information behind them. That if they want to learn about the history of the Third Reich, or they want to learn about the history of the rise of socialism and its counterparts and National Socialism in Europe, they can access information about every facet of the topic. So this means you can't just give people access to knowledge as in bulk. You have to give them access to structured narratives that allow them to focus on a particular topic. Wikipedia is great for researchers who are trying to answer particular questions, but it's not as great for people who are trying to learn or master everything about a subject. This brings us to open educational resources. In general, Wikipedia is one of the most effective components of the OERs, but OERs as a whole are a constellation of things built on top of that kind of structure.
All right, and I'd like to transition from Hitler over to SUNY now, but there is a connection here because we need to keep educational resources open, and SUNY has opened last year an office to support open educational resources, and there's a real surge of interest from the academic community. And a conference I attended recently for SUNY academics and so on, you can see a lot of these talks here. These are some of the talks that were presented back in May at one of the SUNY schools. So you can see OERs are a big thing. Many of these talks are well attended, a lot of interest. But what can we do to help provide educational resources? So we started many years ago trying to put together collections of Wikipedia articles just as offline collections and just to organize some of the Wikipedia content. We started with a 1.0 project. That takes its name from a sort of article written by Jimmy Wales, where he envisaged books being published, and that became the brand, at least in the early days. And the early ones were done often with a group of volunteers. You could do a common thing was to start with everything. In the early days, just perhaps 100,000 articles, you could actually do that. and just remove the articles you don't want. We started a different approach. English Wikipedia was already big. We wanted to try and pick articles deliberately, rather than starting with everything and cutting things out. But to do that, you need a system of assessment. And in 2005, there was no system of assessment, really, across Wikipedia. So how would you know, if you're going to select articles, it's now over 5 million, how are you going to select just ones that are relevant for a particular purpose? So the idea we had was to do this through wiki projects, which, in case you're not familiar, I know most people are very familiar with this stuff, but they're usually groups of editors who have a particular focus interest. And those are the people who care about these articles and also who know how good or bad they are. So this is the sort of flow chart we came up with. So first you pick, first of all you assess the articles. Once you have most of the articles assessed, and now in 2017 we do, in fact by 2009 pretty much everything was assessed on English Wikipedia. Then you can select the articles, choose which version of the article you want, the Rev ID. You want to avoid a vandalized version, and then you go to publication. All right, so if I can look at the first three CDs, DVDs shown there were all done by manual curation, pretty much. In fact, there's one on the right. I did a lot of I must have read half the articles on that CD myself, because we didn't really have a lot of those tools in place. But we just wanted to proof of concept that we could do this. The German and Polish Wikipedia produced some fantastic selections, but it involved hundreds and hundreds of volunteers, I believe, putting the collections together. This is a page from the 2007 CD that we produced. Around the same time, a guy called Andrew Cates, working with SOS Children's Villages, put together these collections based on the UK curriculum. So he was already thinking of this educational purpose for these. Now, the collections we'd done were general and more aimed at a general adult audience. These were focused on dinosaurs, animals, things that kids like, as well as the books that the kids had to read for their curriculum. And they did several collections. They also had an army of volunteers, and they actually read every single article and curated it. So they would actually take out sections or tailor those articles to their specific needs. And they've been very popular, I think, with on Kiwix. Those releases have been very popular. I went on with the 1.0 team to work on two more releases, which were 0.7 and 0.8. We still haven't made it to 1.0 for reasons I'll explain. For 0.7, which came out, I think, in 2009 or so, we were able to start using the assessment system. So now we could pick much bigger selections, and this was all maintained by bot. So really the selection was semi-automated. We, however, couldn't do the version check. We had to do that semi-manually. We had a script that found all the swear words, and then I spent 6 to 8 months going through 22,000 cases of possible vandalism, looking for them one by one. That's not scalable, but for version 0.8, we actually weren't able to produce such a nice index, but we were able to automate version selection. Wikitrust is an extension of Wikipedia which is no longer maintained, unfortunately, but which, through their code, they had data on how trustworthy every editor is. who's ever edited almost any of the Wikipedias. And through that, they were able to rate which versions should be the more reliable ones. And so we used that, and we found virtually no vandalism. I should point out, the reason I care a lot about version selection is if you have a Wikipedia article online and it says, Angela Merkel is the President of the United States, you immediately go in and fix it. If you produce a DVD, as we were doing, or you produce an offline collection that's going to 1 million schools, and your collection has that error in it, that will be the thing everybody remembers about your stupid release. They won't remember the 49,999 articles, whatever it is, that were great. They'll remember the one that had the mistake. So it's important, quality is important.
Around the same time the 0.7 was being made, people were making a bunch of other focus selections for schools. Back to motivation. Schools generally have a very narrow range of materials that they're allowed to buy, that they're encouraged by their governments to buy in the US and other countries. That essential monopoly on what students learn in science is usually not so bad, but in history and in sociology, you often get historical revisionism. For a number of countries like Peru, the teachers contributed to making indexes like this chemistry wiki slice. And the kind of work that went into building a beautiful front page also went into the bundle that Martin was talking about. There were collections made for children's books like Wiki Junior. There was a collection extension and a book extension supported by Subu and others that turned into an entire series of books compiled by Wikipedians and then printed out by a commercial publisher. We haven't figured out how to visualize these or make them beautiful and visible and feature them the way we feature articles. They would be compiled in the background and usually advertised as such. But this is the kind of work that needs to be made easier. We need to make sure that this works for the use cases of teachers and for the use cases of classes. So for the most part, this stopped at things about the size of a chapter. Which brings us to current selection techniques.
Well, things kind of stopped in the 1.0 project because we lost a key person who was basically bridging what the community was doing, what I was coordinating with what Emmanuel and the Kiwix team were doing at their end. We didn't have that connection. I do hope that in the last year or two we've actually built some connections with new people who are going to help us do that. Also, I know Emmanuel and Kiwix have actually been able to, through MW Offliner and things, they're actually, we're getting closer. Why did we never release a 1.0? Well, I wanted a 1.0 to have a proper landing page and index. These are the things that we're really, we still need to work on. We also need the version control. We lost that when Wikitrust was no longer supported, and we do have some ways of doing it in a cruder way, but we need to make sure that the quality is there. And, oh, can you go back? We need, not necessarily to edit, but we need to be able to produce collections more than every 3 years, okay? We want to be able to produce a monthly collection. In other words, it should be not years and years of work, shouldn't be months of me reading through bad word lists. Okay, so that was where I think we're getting close to 1.0, but we also need to have our vision looking forward for where we want to be. So my personal views, and I think SJ and I share a lot of these views, that first it should be something people can edit and contribute to. We heard about Wikifundy already. Having local people be able to write articles that are relevant for them and either incorporate that in the wider Wikipedia or at least incorporate that into the resources used in that area. And we have to deal with the forking, merging issue, but that could be very, very useful, I think. And the other thing is, we should, I think, stop so much thinking about just producing a Wikipedia and start thinking about the target audiences. Is this for a prison? Is it for a school? Is it for an emergency room doctor? The needs are different. And we need to be less focused on lists of articles and start to think, as SJ was showing, clusters, collections of centered around a topic. And my dream would, and I'm sure many of your dreams as well, is that we could have that clustered topic and we'd be able to bridge a Khan Academy video on linear algebra connected to an article in Wikipedia on linear algebra, connected to maybe a science simulation that shows this applied. A lot of open content linked together, working together around the topic rather than about, it shouldn't be about the structure. The user just wants to know about algebra or something. So that would be my vision, and I'd like to.
Thanks, Martin. Most of us here have been working on making collections and on the mechanics of distribution, setting up channels, and providing search. And what's missing, in my view, from what went into the most beautiful snapshots made before is the design and the curation and the context for a collection. A lot of us are spending most of our time making sure we can distribute images that were made once 4 years ago by 2 people under time pressure. And it was so painful to do that no one came back afterwards and said, let's make it more beautiful. Let's improve the image quality. Let's make sure that people are actually reading and using more than a couple of the articles in it. So we haven't developed ways to figure out what people use, what they find interesting. We haven't developed ways to let curators and polishers continue to update something like Slice. And we haven't found ways to automate the most painful part, which is literally humans reading and removing spam. We now have things like OERs. They should make a lot of these challenges much easier. We've developed a much better measuring and a much better, yeah, but we have composite quality measures now that make it much easier to automatically extract things that people are using based on how much they're reading them online. And there's just a little bit of integration of the existing tools to pull all that together. And at the same time, there's been a renewed interest among funders and educators in making open educational resources part of every school and every university's mandates. And there are a lot of institutions who feel it's their job to do this, but they don't know how. And hopefully we can allow people not to recreate all of the editorial work that's gone into wiki content, because most of those groups are paying editors to write things from scratch. And in the context of being a support framework for other educators, building the hooks so that people who view themselves as publishers can use the materials that we already have in our databases to make other beautiful things.
I'll start right away with the general story. So Learning Equality is a non-profit based out of sunny San Diego. We're about a team of 25. Founded for the past 5 years, we've been building EdTech tools. And we have 2 products that are, some of you might be familiar with, Lite. And I'm here to talk about Kolibri, which is our new product and platform. What is Kolibri? Open source EdTech platform for schools, and I use the term school in a very broad sense. It could be you learning by yourself at home, could be a grassroots learning center somewhere in a remote area, or it could be a school board that wants to implement infrastructure for the entire province of Quebec, for example. So Kolibri is not just an app. I want to talk about the different pieces that fit together. So we also do content. In order for the app to work, we need to source the content somewhere, so I'll talk a bit about that. Distributing the content, as this is an offline, I don't need to explain how important the offline access is. And we're very cross-platform. Windows, mobile, everything works from the same code base. Who's familiar with Lite? Audience participation. Okay. And who has heard of Kolibri? Okay. So then this is perhaps the most useful slide, is like what's going on. So Kolibri is the evolution of Lite. All the lessons we took from the field, from technical considerations, are now been folded into Kolibri. So it's very much the same use case. You know, it's a school in a box. But what's the difference? So the diff is previous Lite was focused on Khan Academy content, and working with partners, we need more than just Khan Academy. We want to source, there's all kinds of useful educational content out there. So that's one of the changes. And we've made it easy to upload new content to the content curation server. Instead of being like a fixed channel that everyone that uses, by popular demand, we want to be able to take existing channels and remix them and organize them in a way, for example, take all of Spanish content from this channel, combine it with Spanish content from another channel. So that's going to be a very big focus. So Kolibri, we talk about Kolibri, but it's really two things. The Kolibri content curation server, sometimes called content curation server, sometimes content workshop. So please excuse us for the terminology, but content curation server in the following slides. That's where all the hard work of aligning content to different curricula is done, and it's a cloud application. I mean, you can run it on localhost if you want, but it's in the cloud for now. The purpose of this is so that from the end user, the user-facing application, to make things easy. So you don't want to be clicking on 100 things. You want to have a simple concept like import this content. So we've offloaded all the content work into the central server, and this is the distributed part, the Kolibri application. I've put here on the left the different people where they would be involved. So just an example use case, the school board of Quebec, sticking to Quebec, could curate a channel using content from Khan Academy French to align to the Quebec curriculum. So is this graded, taught in grade 6, then we move it to appropriately. So then that's the work where the work would happen in the content creation server. Again, to simplify from the point of view of teachers, you just say, I'm on this channel, it's already aligned to Quebec, and you don't, the curation work can be done once in a central place. So you've seen channel a couple of times, so I want to define what is a content channel for us. You can think of it as, well, it is a tree. The topics are folder-like things. Topic nodes are folders, and then the content nodes, audio, document. A lot of web content is packaged into a zip file, video, and exercises. So this is specific to Khan Academy exercises, but also we have other, you can create your own exercises that are not Perseus. A couple of points about channels that the API allows you to do bulk imports. So you have a large content repository, you can import a giant channel using a script. Channels are also manually curated. We talked about alignment, but it could be just for personal use. The teacher says, I want to have, for this classroom, for this year, I want to have a custom version. There's rich metadata between content items. In addition to content level, we can have prerequisite structure, tags, anything. Something I wanted to mention is we have two notion of a listed and unlisted channel, or public and unlisted. most of the content is open source and open content. So you'll be able to search and view everything. The certain partners have different licensing agreements and they want to use Kolibri, but they say this is not with their proper closed source content. So there is a notion that the infrastructure can be used even if it's not an open license. All right, so this is where I want to spend the most of the time, is to explain how we think about the content pipeline. We use the food analogies for the whole thing. Perhaps that will be useful if you're looking at the GitHub to see what's going on, what are the projects. They all make sense, you just have to know. The trick is that, imagine you have some fish, and you want to cut that fish into tasty little morsels. And with the help of a rice cooker, you can package this and deliver tasty content. So that's so what we call, everyone here calls scraping. We call those chef scripts. So every content source is associated with an import script and creates the channel on the content server. So this is the API for uploading files, uploading metadata. We want to have the hard work of transcoding video, these kind of things, to be done before it ever hits the content server. So rice cooker is helper script for accessing YouTube, creating subtitles, and general things that every chef needs to do have been factored out into a library that's very useful for scraping and so on. Now, coming here to the end users, Kolibri, from the point of view of Kolibri, you just say import channel, and you can import one of these giant channels, Khan Academy, exactly like it is, how it is in K8 Lite. What's new here is this ability to curate and customize channels, to create derivative channels. Could be for any purpose. There's also the ability to author new content on the system. This is currently in development. You can already add certain things, but it's something we want to work on going forward. So the idea is that we give the tools for curators to have a central place. So the source content is there, and if you need it for your particular purpose, perhaps limited file size, perhaps language, perhaps mix of different content, this is the place to do it, in the central place, in order to keep the application simple. From the point of view of the application, you say, I want to import this, it's done. Some technical notes. Kolibri is pure Python, which enables it to run on all kinds of platforms. The same code base runs on Mac, Linux, Android, not on iOS. The Mac icon there is desktop. There are two high-level, two use cases. Either you run it on your device, or as a server deployment. Yeah, it works great. So this is another important aspect. Several people I talked to the last week is, obviously getting the content is an important. So the arrows going to the right, but there's this other aspect when deploying in a big school board, or the administrators want to know, basically show that we are making a difference to education. So aggregation of logs, learning analytics, and usage needs to be, so some of our best coders are working on this infrastructure question, so that perhaps a central school server can have the aggregation of all the usage statistics. If you have internet, you can import the channel by downloading it, and obviously the USB stick is probably going to be the most important thing. You bring 16 gig USB stick, and suddenly you have a whole wealth of resources available to you. What's done, what's going on currently with Kolibri is it's in beta, but it's ready, but it's in active development. But it will be ready in September or October. So we're going with a very aggressive deadline for release this fall. A lot of dev effort going on at the moment. Also, like I said, it's not just Kolibri, it's the content that needs to be in Kolibri. So the content dev team is scraping all kinds of sources right now. And it's not just Kolibri and the content, there is also the implementation side. So I think it's really important how to train people, teacher trainers, administration trainers. Basically, there's associated documentation that will make this possible to deploy. That's what I would say. Oh, for Lite, what's happening with Lite? It's still around. It's still going to be supported, and no one is replacing it. If you like Lite, it's still good. Now, I think we believe Kolibri's improvement is like version 2, and if you want to have access to these new channels that we're working on importing, it's up to you to transition on your own time scale. It's already ready to test. I encourage you to show a little demo in a second, but the application is ready, the content creation server is ready. We're polishing the final touches like language support and so on and so forth. Okay, little demo. So that's Kolibri, the user-facing application running on a server. Looks identical if you run it on a mobile phone. So this instance has 7 channels imported. And the one thing I want to demo is, so for example, this is Khan Academy English has exactly as in Lite, the deep hierarchy of topics, subtopics, and so on and so forth. Videos and exercises. Now, people who are familiar with Lite are familiar with this content, but this is the new part, is when you can have a channel. This was manually curated, taking content from all the other channels. So now you can have a mix of, going back to math, this is MIT Blossoms. It's a video resource that we scraped the video. We have Khan Academy exercises. So this is really what teachers want. They've said many times is, Lite is great, but we want to have this ability to customize the order of content items. So now, from the point of view of the teacher, all they had to do is import this channel. All the curation work can be done once up front. And that's it. I mean, I'll just point everyone to the GitHub, which is, everything is MIT licensed and publicly available. Kolibri is Kolibri. Content curation server is called Content Curation Server. These are the 2 main blocks. We've also talked with many people about the infrastructure for scraping. I think there's worth looking at how our scrapers work. And that's it. Who wants to fly? Kolibri is ready to fly.
Everybody's kind of heard of Internet in the Box by now. We've talked about some specific projects using Internet in the Box, the medical that we're feverishly rolling out, and other things. We went to Mexico with it on the education side. So I just wanted to drill down a little bit under the hood to say how do we stitch things together. So to talk about, we actually have a repository called IAB Factory, and just to talk a little bit about that at a very low level. This is a little segment of the main menu of one instance. You can see, obviously, there's some references to ZIMS, the English Wikipedia, the Wiktionary, Khan Academy Lite. You can see the start of OpenStreetMaps below that. So we didn't write any of that software. We don't write Kiwix, we don't write Lite. We're concerned with how can you put all this together, what tools can you bring to bear, how can you make an easily installable platform that this will all run on. We try to be as broad as possible, so not just things that we might call content, but also applications. From our one laptop per child heritage, we got Moodle, we have WordPress, many of things that you might think of as an interactive application. Lite is such an interactive application, but we add a lot of other things beyond what you might just strictly call content. Just to start with the kind of the structure of how we are organized, the Internet in a Box itself is found on GitHub in an IAB repository, and that's where the Ansible playbook, I'll talk about that in a minute, that's where all of that would be found. Which includes all of the applications that could be installed into Internet in a Box. Then Factory is kind of a higher level than that. If you want to target a particular set of users, you may not want everything, and so Factory provides ways of creating images, and also, by which I mean loadable images, for example, on a Raspberry Pi or on a Nuke or other piece of hardware, and also subsets of content that are appropriate for a particular audience. And I'll focus on that today, but I want to do a few things to get to that. The menus that you see are dynamically generated. To a certain extent, we followed Rachel's lead in that, but there were some things about the way they did them that weren't quite as flexible as what we wanted, so we've done that a bit different. And then there's a whole admin console, and I'll show a little bit of that in a minute. So the base Internet in a Box is installed with Ansible. In fact, if you pull the repository and run Ansible, which is the actual command, it will build a whole server for you. The configuration of what you're actually going to get is controlled by a file that's called local vars. And in local vars you can do things like say k and Lite install true, and k Lite enable true. You can say qx install true, and you might in some instances say Moodle install false. Or depending on your needs. So there's actually a long list of variables that can be set, and normally we populate these by default for you, but we give you the control to override things if you want a subset of that. And there are within the Ansible application, there are ways to just run a single service for install. Let's say one of your installs didn't go right, so you have to redo something, so you can do that. And these playbooks automate to the extent that we can, and so far pretty good, everything you need to do to install one of these applications. So for example, for Lite, by the time it's done, the admin user is created, all the software is on, the admin user is created, and you're actually ready just to log in and decide which of the videos you want to download. Just to mention that the distros we also are, though obviously we've had a lot of emphasis on the Raspberry Pi, but we do have people using Internet in the Box sometimes on repurposed corporate hardware that they've gotten donated, and you've probably seen the Nook and other kinds of small Intel devices around. So we try to support various hardware, and we had pretty much focused on Fedora and CentOS out of the one laptop per child heritage, but now we get broader all the time. The Raspberry Pi focuses more into other operating systems, so that's what we're doing. And I noticed that everybody had a lot of pictures in their slides, so and it is actually a bear to do some of this stuff. So I threw in this picture. So the factory is really divided into two parts. One has to do with making images, and one has to do with adding content. This is actually a shot you probably can't read from the GitHub repository. This one shows various commands for setting up an image. There's a lot of things that need to be finessed at the end of just the install. For example, on a Raspberry Pi you have a wide open password, so we have a script to kind of tighten that down a little bit. We have a script called Make Content Ready, which fixes up, goes and gets the Kiwix catalog, does various things like that, so that you'll be in a position to start getting ZIMs and things like that. Then we have a couple special things for a Raspberry Pi. One of the problems with distributing Raspberry Pi images is, especially if they have content, is they're pretty big. So they're actually the size of whatever SD card you happen to have written them to. In our case, that could be 128 gigs. So we have some scripts that will cut them back down to their minimum size for duplication and also to do copies. On the content side, basically there's a folder for each of the major sources of content that we support: Khan Academy, via Lite, and Kiwix. We have something for the Kiwix APKs, which we also include on the server for the medical wiki. And also Rachel modules, a few modules that we've scraped ourselves. Mostly we rely on other people to scrape things, but we have had requests for things that we had to scrape ourselves, so there's some things about that in there. And one of the things that's actually most recent with the OpenStreetMaps is George has made some scripts to select just a subset of OpenStreetMaps. So if you're limited in space on a device, you might want the whole world at a lower resolution, but you might want a region of interest expressed by a bounding box of latitude and longitude to be at a high resolution. And so we can support that through some scripts that George wrote. Just to say again what we have for each of these content sources in general, we've kind of taken to using the BitTorrent distribution for Lite. The videos are smaller and actually more responsive. We also have used the Lite user interface to download videos, but it's sometimes more convenient. The problem with the videos you get is that they have YouTube names which don't mean anything to you, so you need some way of saying, well, I would just like early math. We don't need the science, we don't need the SAT testing or any of that. So we have some scripts where you could just pass a node in the Lite tree to the script, and it'll say, okay, I know everything. It reads the Lite database and says, I know for each language what belongs there. Kiwix, I'll show a GUI for that in a moment. Rachel, we do get modules from the Rachel repository. We have scripts to do that. And I mentioned the OSM. So we have a GUI for configuration and download of some content. Currently working on adding more content to that. It's mostly focused on ZIMs at the moment. This is what the configuration screen looks like in the admin console. You can turn services on and off. You can change the name of the SSID for the Wi-Fi hotspot. There's actually a lot of things you can do to the network. But more importantly, you can go get content. So this is the main screen for downloading ZIMs. You'll see that there's a Select Languages button. If you click on that, you can pop up the 6 most commonly used languages. I guess that's not quite true because Chinese isn't on it, but in the wiki world, at least as it used to be. And then if you click on, there's a more languages, and then if you click on that, you'll get every language that there's a wiki in. And you check the language you want, and then you'll get a list. You're seeing mostly English here, but if we were able to scroll down, you might see the Arabic or Hindi or whatever other languages you had selected. So that's just the pop-up. And then after you've checked the ZIMs that you would like to download, it actually creates jobs for them so that you can go away and just let it happen, and you can shut this computer down and come back. And what you will do then is there's a status that you can come to and find out, well, geez, my ZIM's been downloading now for 3 days. I wonder what's going on. And it'll tell you whether it succeeded or not and what state it's in. You'll get some log. I mean, some of the big ZIMs on a slow connection can take quite a while. The other thing that we've added in the application area is people want to know what's going on this server. So there's something called Munin, which will show you a lot of kind of system admin kind of statistics. But the other thing we do, of course, the Apache server is logging access, and people are interested in knowing what gets used, and that's an important statistic that we want to feed back. And we're working on logging QX through and Lite through the Apache server, but obviously all the other modules that are used automatically get logged by Apache, and we have a AW Stats, which is a known package, which will display graphically which were the most important articles or whatever were used in a Wikipedia, and to help funders and other people who want to know how things are going to understand what's been going on in the server. So I just mentioned we use the GitHub Wiki for installation instructions and various, sometimes fairly technical documentation about how things work and the various things that we use in it. I'll leave the story on where images are going to go, but we're talking there. That's a stay tuned story. So we're happy. We're a collective of volunteers. Nobody pays us. We've been working on this, some of us, for quite a long time, and so we'd be happy to have help from anybody. Mentioned some of the areas here that we could use help with, but anybody who wants to help our team is greatly appreciated. We're also looking forward to increase this meeting has led us to a place where hopefully we can do more sharing of code and other kinds of resources. I'd love to know more about IdeaBox and know where their content is, so I could start to import that too. And looking forward to collaborating more. And this is just one more picture that I thought I'd add. I actually took it. It's the Northern Lights in Denali Park in Alaska. So, and that's it.
Hey, Tim, where can I buy it in the bar?
How much you got? Do you want to take that on?
Yeah, so SJ and I have spent the last, among others, spent the last couple of days discussing how we're going to get these things for sale, and all down to the list when we get these things out there. So hopefully before Christmas.
And building your own is not as hard as some people would claim.
Yeah,
keep in touch.
Yeah, it's not like it's super easy to build your own, but we're going to be offering them for healthcare providers who want to build their own.
2 questions about offline Wikipedia. Now, you were talking about article selection and spam and vandalism. Have you looked at using OERs for the article selection?
Yes, I think that will be, I mentioned some new tools that are available, and SJ did actually mention OERs at the end as something.
Oh, okay.
This already came up actually last year in Italy, and we spent some time on OERs sessions. I don't think we've quite understood it well enough, but I think there's a lot of interest in using that, the filtering process that OERs.
The other question I had was, you talked about learning from Wikifandi, about editing, I think. Could you expand on that, what you have learned?
That's really a dream based on what I've learned this week. I know that we'd like to, and I know SJ has said the same thing, that he'd like to have local people be able to produce their own content. Wikifunding is already doing a little bit of that, from what I understand. I know it's just beginning, but I want to talk to them, at least to Michael this week, and learn how that could be incorporated into the Wikipedia project generally.
A comment on those two things. Wikifunding is doing amazing work. They don't know how to think about sending the new articles that they have back to a wiki. And it's essential for us to set up some scratch space where we can start doing that and just say, if you have anything in any format, post those files, we will figure the rest out. Let's make this a repeated process. And regarding ORES, things like ORES right now measure the quality of a particular revision. They're not, we should think about how to expand that to include a number of different filter types. One filter might be for quality, one might be for spam, one might be for bad words. For different groups will have different notions of bad words. I hate it when people use the word chartreuse, it makes me really ill. And even for the things that annoy us because they sound like censorship, almost every snapshot of any kind is doing some kind of filtering. It could be for length, it could be for language complexity. If we can build ORES hooks that allow us to use the machine learning and the other options to just capture what humans are doing, that would be great.
Basically, I have a question to all of you, inspired by the view from the internet in a box. Like, I see there are those different, you call them channels at a different level, but they're basically silos. They don't talk to each other. I was wondering to what extent you can make them talk to each other, and what role Wikidata, for instance, could play in there, because it is already linked to some of them, and linked to basically all of the topics that the individual components do talk about.
We, as you import different channels, so the idea of annotating, for example, I'm thinking prerequisites when interpreting your question is, can we do cross-channel? So we can already include in a mix of different sources, mapping this topic, this content in this channel is equivalent to this content in this channel. Today we're working on search this week. That's a good idea. That's a good idea. Specific use case I imagine is using prerequisites from Khan Academy to learn some other topic and things like that. This would be possible right now, but it has to be a human annotated addition to the cross-channel links. I don't know how we could use Wikidata.
Yeah, I think Wikidata is very exciting. I'm certainly excited about it. The challenge I find is it's immense, and I don't know how we get part of it offline and make sure that it's the part that we need for any given task. Certainly, if it could get into a pipeline workflow to use it to pre-populate channels or make connections, I think that's a great idea. We are very siloed. Kolibri is really, in a way, the first tool to try to make cross connections for a particular subject matter, and I think it's going to be a difficult job, and so I would be interested in that.
Yeah, it's interesting to see your work on Kolibri. So it touches upon the question I had asked yesterday about the pipeline architecture for sharing. So one question I had was, what is exchange data? Is there some kind of a data exchange format between your content server and your application? Because, okay, so can somebody, for example, write a content bundle using the format, but which comes from somewhere else without having to hit your content server?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So potentially then somebody could take that bundle and use in another application, or you could use content from elsewhere as long as one writes up that format. Okay, that's neat.
Content format is very simple. It's files in a content addressable file system, so for all the media files. And there's an associated metadata file in a SQLite file. So reading, if you wanted to export a channel to another format, for example, like a ZIM file, you would read the metadata and then take the files to create a channel. So the purpose of the server is to automate some of these things, but technically if you can produce a SQLite file with the right metadata from another means, that would be totally fine too.
So I think one of the key parts of this discussion is the catalog. And we've talked about how to make a general catalog for various service providers in a common language and extensible, so that they cover originators, they cover distributors, they cover people who change navigation metadata, and eventually we can all subscribe, and we don't necessarily, the catalog knows where things are, and we don't have to, the user doesn't have to know where things are, and so we get to a broader vision at that point. We're not there yet, but the catalogs, I think, are starting to merge. We've had discussions with the various parties already to take a common technology standard for the catalogs.
That's good. That's what I was kind of asking about. So that's great.
Yeah, thank you. Yvonne, whose name I never can pronounce correctly. Once the first 1 million Kolibris have been sold next year, should we host this meeting in San Diego next year?
Yeah. It's a nice place. You do it even in winter, and people will still come. I approve.
Done.